Hello. Have you ever had a moment in your life when someone made you so mad that you just wanted to take them and throw them straight into hell? Well, Dante Alighieri kind of did that, because he wrote Inferno, which obviously takes place in hell, and he put everyone he didn't like there. And today I'm going to tell you the whole story of Inferno. But before that, we should talk a bit about the author, so let's get into it. And of course, as usual, I have lots of visual scenes prepared for you, so stay tuned for that and subscribe. Dante Alighieri was an Italian author who lived and created between the 13th and 14th centuries. So a long time ago, still in the Middle Ages, but getting close to the end of them, as Dante has died about 100 years before the Renaissance. And so what you need to know about Inferno is that it's actually the first part of a larger work called the Divine Comedy. The second part is called Purgatorio, and the third part Paradiso. So we have hell, purgatory, and paradise. And I will talk about Purgatorio and Paradiso as well, but in separate videos. Now, the Divine Comedy is considered to be one of the greatest works of Western literature for several reasons. One of them is that Dante used the spoken form of Italian when writing it, which was pretty uncommon, as back then poetry was typically written in Latin. And thanks to this decision, Dante helped to establish the modern-day standardized Italian language. And so because of that, Dante is often referred to as the father of the Italian language. Another important thing about Dante is that he was deeply associated and affected by the politics of Italy. Because, keeping it very short, during Dante's life, a large part of Italy was divided into two factions. The first one, called the Guelphs, supported the Pope, while the second one, called the Ghibellines, supported the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Dante's family was on the side of the Guelphs, so the ones who supported the Pope, and basically one thing led to another, and Dante ended up being exiled from Florence. And it was during his exile that he wrote the Divine Comedy. And also, sorry that my pronunciation is not very constant, because I know that sometimes I pronounce it with the Italian pronunciation and sometimes with the English one, but I've been doing a lot of lessons, like Italian lessons on Duolingo, and I've been having a lot of fun with that, so I just wanted to try my Italian pronunciation, but at the same time I don't want to pronounce, for example, Dante throughout the whole video in Italian pronunciation, because that would be kind of tricky, especially considering that my first language is actually Polish, so even speaking in English is kind of tricky for me sometimes. So yeah, but just, let's just get into the video. So now we finally begin the story, and we are in a dark forest. Here we see a middle-aged Dante wandering in the darkness and saying that he doesn't really know how he managed to get here. The only thing he remembers is that he became overwhelmed by drowsiness, which made him leave the true path. So Dante just wanders around when suddenly he sees a mountain illuminated by sunlight, and so he figures that going there will probably bring him to safety. He starts climbing it, but as he does so, a panther shows up and blocks his way. Then, after the panther vanishes, we see a lion coming up. He roars loudly and then leaves, after which Dante notices a wolf passing by. And so, as you might expect, Dante is not especially excited about climbing the mountain anymore, and so because of that, he retreats back to the woods. And different sources interpret the animals in different ways, but it's usually said that they represent 3 of the 7 deadly sins, and so the panther is lust, the lion is pride, and the wolf is greed. And so those were the literal events from the story, but you can also say that Dante was on the right path towards God and enlightenment, but in the middle of his life he went astray, he got lost in the chaos and darkness of the world, and he became detached from God. Then he saw the possibility of salvation, but lust, pride and greed blocked his way, and so now he's back in the chaos. Now we are back in the forest, where Dante sees a mysterious figure who turns out to be Virgil, the ancient Roman poet, who just so happens to be Dante's biggest influence. Dante immediately tells Virgil that he loves him so much, and then he begs for his help with the wolf from before. To this, Virgil offers to be Dante's guide, as in order to get out they need to go through a place that's not especially nice, full of despairing shrieks, people asking for a second death, and those who dwell in the eternal fire. But after that they will reach purgatory and later heaven. And so Dante of course agrees, and they both leave the scene. Now they walk and talk for a while, and Dante begins to doubt himself, and so he asks Virgil to judge if he has enough virtue for this huge journey, as he's neither Aeneas nor Paul, and so he deems himself unworthy. And to this, Virgil is like, okay, I know that you are scared, but you have to know that this is very normal for people to feel like this when they are close to a noble deed. So in order to soothe Dante, Virgil explains why he came here. And it turns out that as Virgil was stuck in limbo, which will be explained later, he suddenly heard a lovely woman calling him. And with a soft, angelic voice, she introduced herself as Beatrice, and explained that she had come all the way from heaven in order to ask Virgil to assist Dante on his journey through hell. And she also promised that if Virgil does so, then she will praise him in front of the Lord. So to this, Virgil said that she doesn't really have to say anything else because he will gladly obey her will, but at the same time he was curious about the exact reason for Beatrice coming here. So she then tells the whole story of what has happened up in paradise. It turns out that one day a blessed lady, who was most likely the Virgin Mary, began to cry over Dante's fate so hard that she eventually turned to Saint Lucia and told her that her faithful servant needs her help. So to this, Saint Lucia came to Beatrice and told her to save the man who loved her so deeply, and so without a second thought, Beatrice came to Virgil and repeated the same thing about saving Dante. And so now Virgil tells Dante to be brave, as the three blessed ladies pray for him in heaven, and Dante indeed feels a bit better and stronger, and so he asks Virgil to lead the way. Following that, we find ourselves in front of the gate of hell, where Dante and Virgil enter the scene. They see the words "Abandon all hope, you who enter here," written on the gate, and then they go through it while holding hands, which is cute. Next, we finally make our way into hell, and we hear lots of screams, complaints, voices of anger and agony. Dante is obviously terrified, and so he asks Virgil, who are the people who lament here? And Virgil explains that those are the souls of the people who were just indifferent during their lifetime. So they were not really rebellious, but they were also not very faithful towards God, as they were rather faithful to themselves. And so because of that, they were neither welcome in heaven nor in hell. So now Dante asks, why do they lament so bad? And Virgil explains that the world has forgotten about them, and so they no longer have any hope of death, while at the same time they are envious of every other state that they are not in. And the people here have a task, which is to constantly chase a banner that keeps changing its direction without a break. And of course it symbolizes the people who can't pick a side, and so they just change their minds like a banner on a wind. And on top of that, they are being stung by flies and hornets, and their blood drips down their feet where many worms swirl on the ground. Now Dante and Virgil walk towards a river called Acron, and once they reach it, they notice an old man approaching them by a boat. And of course it's the mythological Charon. He comes closer and he's like, "You poor things who will never get to heaven. I came here to take some souls on a journey, but wait, who is this living guy here?" And so Charon explains that Dante has to find another port with a lighter vessel to carry him. But Virgil replies that their journey is guided by the highest will, and so because of that, no one should question it. Charon is not especially happy when he hears it, and so now we learn that his eyes show a fire of anger. But despite that, he just motions for the dead souls to get into the boat, and they fly in like autumn leaves from a tree, which is a beautiful description. Then Dante and Virgil make their way into the boat as well, and as they are on it, suddenly a strong wind and a terrifying storm appear around them. And Dante gets so terrified that he faints, and so because of that, we don't really know how the journey deeper into hell looked like. Now we find ourselves on the verge of hell, where Dante wakes up due to a loud thunder. And as he's looking around, he notices that Virgil is actually extremely pale. And so because of that, he's like, "How shall I come if you are terrified?" But Virgil says that no, he is actually mistaken, because this is not fear on his face, but rather pity for those below them. After that, they begin to descend, and they quickly find themselves inside the first circle of hell called Limbo. Here, they encounter spirits who don't really lament that much, they just sigh a lot, and that's because they are not tormented, but rather lost in sorrow. And Virgil explains that the souls here did not really sin during their lifetime. They were actually perfectly virtuous, but they were born before Jesus, and so because of that, they were never baptized, and because of that, they did not know how to love God properly. And Virgil is of course one of them. So Dante then wanders for a while, and then he asks if there's any possibility for a soul to move from limbo to heaven. And Virgil explains that yes, there were a couple of souls that got this blessing, as Jesus was here before, during the time between his death and resurrection. And once Jesus got to limbo, he saved Adam, Abel, Noah, Moses, Abraham, David, and many others. Then, as Dante and Virgil continue to walk through the forests of Limbo, suddenly they see 4 souls approaching them. And here we see Homer, Horace, Ovid, and Lucan. They all greet each other here, and Dante then adds that they all accepted him as one of their own, which makes him very happy, obviously. Then they talk with each other as they make their way through 7 portals, and then they walk out onto a meadow where they see lots of amazing people from the past. Among them, we can see characters like Electra, Hector, Aeneas, and Caesar. And then Dante notices a separate group which consists of great philosophers such as Aristotle, Plato, Socrates, and Seneca. Following that, Virgil and Dante enter the second circle of hell, which consists of those who were overcome by lust. And the guys see Minos standing in the entrance and judging the souls that come up to him. He first examines their sins, and then he assigns them to the appropriate circle of hell. And he's doing so by swirling his tail around himself, and the amount of the swirls indicates which level of hell the soul should fall into. Now, as soon as Minos notices the guys coming closer, he immediately recognizes that Dante is alive, and so because of that, he warns him about going any further into hell, as it might be dangerous for him to do so. But to this, Virgil is like, What are you crying about? Our journey is fate ordained and it's the will of the Most High, so you should not ask any questions. And thanks to this, they go into the second circle of hell, where the sounds of lamentations fill the entire space, and it's also completely dark here. Dante then describes that the second circle is filled with souls who are tossed everywhere around by a hurricane that never ends. And those are the sinners who lived their lives by their senses and not reason. Then, as the guys are standing and looking at the eternal storm, Virgil begins to point out some specific souls. And we have here Cleopatra, Helen, Paris, Achilles, and some others. Then Dante gets interested in two souls that fly up to him and turn out to be Francesca and Paolo. Francesca tells the story of her life, which basically sums up to her being forced into marrying an old and deformed man who just so happened to have a handsome younger brother, Paolo. So of course, Francesca cheated on her husband, who caught her with Paolo and then stabbed them both, causing them to die. And Dante gets pretty sad here because the story is quite sad, as it was not even like a lustful cheating or something like this, but Francesca was just reading a book with Paolo about Lancelot and Guinevere, and as they got to a fragment about how amazing it is to be kissed by the one who truly loves you, they both looked into each other's eyes and Paolo kissed her. And right after that, her husband killed both of them. So yeah, that's pretty sad considering that Francesca was forced to marry an older guy, which of course doesn't justify cheating, but like, I don't know, I feel like this is just a very sad situation for everyone involved. And Dante thinks so as well because he faints from intense emotions. Following that, we get into the third circle of hell, where Dante regains consciousness and he sees a never-ending cold and heavy rain everywhere around. And here we meet the guardian of the third circle of hell, which turns out to be Cerberus, barking at the souls who are stuck in the mud. Then, as he notices the guys coming closer, Virgil takes some of the mud and he tosses it into Cerberus's jaws, making him go quiet. After that, Dante and Virgil make their way further into the third circle, stepping on the souls who are stuck in the mud. Then one of the souls stands up and asks Dante to recall him, but Dante doesn't really remember the guy. And so he introduces himself as Chaco, which means a hog, and in general this nickname was given to those who were possessed by gluttony, those who ate and drank a lot during their lifetime. Chaco begins to talk about the politics in Florence, and he gives Dante a prophecy which indicates that the black side of the conflict will drive out the white one. And to understand this, we need to go back to history for a moment. Because remember when in the beginning I told you that in Italy there was a conflict between the Guelphs who supported the Pope and the Ghibellines who supported the Emperor? Well, at one point there was a big battle between them and the Guelphs won, which made Dante very happy as he was a part of them. But did it stop humanity from fighting? Well, of course not, because 5 years after the big battle, the Catholic Church got a new pope. So now some of the Guelphs liked the new pope while some of them did not, and because of that they divided into the black Guelphs who supported the pope and the white ones who wanted to reduce his influence. And Dante belonged to the white Guelphs who eventually lost and they were expelled from Florence. And just to remind you, Chekhov predicts here that the black side of the conflict will drive out the white one, which is indeed what happened, but it's not really a prophecy on Dante's side, as remember that he was writing the Divine Comedy while he was already on the exile. Then after that, Chekhov disappears into the mud and the guys leave the scene. Following that, we find ourselves into the fourth circle of hell, where we see Plutus, who yells in surprise for Pape Satan as soon as he sees the guys coming closer. But then, as usual, Virgil has a way of dealing with that, and so he tells Plutus to be silent, as their journey was made possible thanks to God's will, and so after hearing that, Plutus of course lets them go. So now the guys make their way through the fourth circle of hell, which is a pretty interesting place. Here we see two groups of souls walking in circles, moving in the opposite directions from each other. And each soul is rolling a big, heavy stone. But then as they clash in the middle of the circle, they curse at each other and they begin to roll their stones again. And the groups are the avaricious, so the ones hoarding the money, and the prodigal, so the ones who spend it without a second thought. And what's interesting is that Dante notices that most of the avaricious are actually clerics, cardinals, and popes. And then Virgil explains that both opposing sides are here because neither respected fortune. And Virgil gets a bit into the nature of fortune, saying that she's just doing her job of distributing wealth among people and she doesn't really care about the ones who curse her. Following that, we find ourselves inside the fifth circle of hell, which is located right next to the river Styx. Here, Virgil and Dante see a bunch of souls covered in mud and fighting with each other. And they not only fight with their hands, but also with their heads, their breasts, feet, and also biting each other. And Virgil explains here that those are the souls of the people who were very angry during their lifetime. And then he points out to some other souls who are hidden under the muddy waters. And those are the sullen, so the people who were just very bitter inside their whole lives, and so now they are not able to express their anger outwardly as they are constantly swallowing the mud. Next, we learn that Dante and Virgil are taken across the river Styx by the boatman Phlegias. And as they make their way through the muddy water, one soul begins to talk with Dante, and it turns out to be Filippo Argenti. Now, when it comes to this guy, you have to know that Dante hated him, as Argenti not only was a part of the Black Guelphs, but he also had a history of slapping Dante, and Argenti's brother stole Dante's possessions after the poet was exiled from Florence. So now Dante gets a bit angry here, but to this Virgil just embraces him, he kisses his face, and then he's like, Dante, you are so right to be mad, as Argenti was so prideful during his lifetime. He had no virtue at all, and so this is why he's so angry in hell now. And after that, the guys gladly watch as some other souls drag Argenti back and then tear him apart. Then the guys swim towards the city of Dis, which contains the lower hell. They come out of the boat, and Virgil says that Dante should stay here while he is going to go and talk to the fallen angels who are guarding the entrance to the city of Dis. After a couple of minutes, he comes back and he's pretty sad because they were not granted the entrance, but he's not giving up. But Dante starts to doubt him a little bit, and Virgil tries his best to hide the fact that he's actually very pale, when suddenly Dante notices 3 Furies in the distance. Furies as in creatures who are half women and half hydras with snakes in place of their hair. Now, as soon as the Furies notice Dante, they begin to shriek, beat their breasts with their hands, and then yell for Medusa to come and turn him into stone. And to this, Virgil turns Dante around and covers his eyes with his hands. But then an angel appears before them, and he comes up to the gate, he touches it with his rod, which forces the doors open for Virgil and Dante to enter. Then the angel says that the demons have to be very arrogant to think that they can stand against the god's will, and then he disappears. So now Virgil and Dante enter the city, which means that they officially enter the sixth layer of hell. Here they see wide plains filled with distress and torment. There's lots of tombs everywhere with uplifted lids and with fire surrounding each one of them. And Virgil explains that this level of hell is reserved for the heretics. And then he adds that on the day of the final judgment, all the graves will be sealed forever. He also points out that Epicurus lays here with all of his followers who believed that the soul dies with the mortal body. Then we see a guy rising up from his grave, and it turns out to be Farinata, who was a famous Ghibelline leader, so a political opposition for Dante's family, and he was also a big fan of the temporary pleasures of life. Then, as Farinata begins to talk with Dante, suddenly another soul joins their conversation. His name is Cavalcante de Cavalcanti, and he turns out to be the father of one of Dante's closest friends, Guido. Now, Cavalcante asks why is his son not with Dante, and he gets a response that, well, maybe Guido just didn't appreciate Virgil enough during his lifetime. And to this, Cavalcante breaks down because he assumes that this has to mean that Guido is not alive anymore, and so he asks if that's the case, but he doesn't get an answer, and so because of that, he just collapses back into his grave. And among all of this distress, Farinata just sits in his own tomb without any change on his face, and then after Cavalcante collapses back into his grave, Farinata just continues his conversation with Dante, just as if nothing had happened. They talk for a moment about the politics, and then Farinata predicts Dante's exile, and this is when Dante realizes that the souls here seem to have insight into the future, but they are not aware of what's happening in the present. Farinata confirms this, and because of that, Dante feels a bit guilty, and so he asks Farinata to tell Cavalcante that his son is actually still alive. And after that, Dante comes back to Virgil and they continue their journey. Next, we find ourselves on the edge of the seventh circle of hell, where Dante and Virgil stop for a moment to take a breath as they feel a horrendous stench coming from the path in front of them. So they sit under the tomb of Pope Anastasius, where Virgil begins to explain the last three circles of hell. And so the seventh circle of hell is reserved for violence, and it's actually divided into three parts. The first part is for the violence against your neighbor, the second part is for violence against ourselves, and then the third one is for the violence against God. And Virgil explains this a bit, saying that violence against our neighbor is of course things like stealing from them or just like hurting them in general. Then violence against ourselves is of course hurting ourselves. But what's interesting is what he says about the violence against God. Virgil says that you can be violent against God in three ways. The first one is if you cry and complain about everything as a habit. The second one is if you deny God in your heart. And then the third one is if you feel superior to nature. Then we learn that the eighth circle of hell contains those who have committed any sort of fraud, as it violates the bond of love given to people by nature. And Virgil explains that fraud includes things like hypocrisy, flattery, magic, falsification, or theft. Then we learn that on the very bottom of hell, in the 9th circle, resides this, with every soul who have ever betrayed someone during their lifetime. Now, Dante and Virgil talk a bit longer, and I really like what Virgil says about art, because he concludes that art is like God's grandchild, because first we only had the divine intellect, so God, then from that came nature, and now art imitates nature, and so because of that, art is like a grandchild of God. A very nice idea. At the very end of this scene, we also learn that God intended for humans to gain money either from nature or from labor, and so because of that, usury is greatly punished. Following that, we finally get into the 7th circle of hell. Here, Virgil and Dante stand on top of a cliff and they see Minotaur on the path in front of them. And Minotaur is angry here because as soon as he sees the guys coming closer, he begins to bite himself. To this, Virgil assures the Minotaur that Dante is not Theseus, who has killed him in the mythology, but in response, the Minotaur begins jumping around just as if he had received a mortal wound, and the guys slip past him to go further down the road. They continue their journey, and now Virgil points to the river of blood, where violent souls who harmed others during their lifetime boil for eternity. Then a bunch of centaurs run up to them and they draw their bows towards the guys because their job here is to keep the souls boiling in the river of blood. But Virgil eases them down, and then he and Dante make their way closer to the centaurs. Now, as they come closer, Chiron, who is the leader of the centaurs, notices that Dante seems to be alive as his steps are very heavy and he moves everything that he touches. Virgil confirms that Dante is alive, and then he explains that they were sent here by the higher power, and in the name of this power he asks for a guide as this place is pretty confusing. To this, Chiron tells Nessus to be their guide and to protect them from anyone who would try to hurt them here. And so now the three of them travels to the 7th circle of hell, and they notice a couple of people who boil in the river of blood. They see Alexander and Dionysius, who were both bloodthirsty tyrants during their lifetime, and they also see Attila the Hun. After a while, they get to the end of the first circle inside the 7th circle, because remember that this circle, the 7th circle of hell, is divided into 3, so you have the violence against your neighbor, and this was this circle. Now we are going to go to the violence against yourself, and then at the end there is violence against God. Next, they enter into the second part of a 7th circle of hell, and they walk into a forest with dark leaves, crooked branches, and thorns with poison instead of fruits. Now, it's said that the forest is pretty empty. The guys don't really see any path in front of themselves, and there's also no animals here. So they walk for a while, and then Dante suddenly stops as he hears voices of lamentation everywhere around, but he's not sure where they are coming from. To this, Virgil tells Dante to break one of the branches. He does so, and then the tree yells, why would he do this? And then the tree explains that every tree here was once a human. And now Virgil says that Dante didn't know about this, so it's not really his fault, and then he encourages the tree to introduce itself. So the tree says that he is Pietro della Vigna, who was the chancellor of the Emperor Frederick II. And his story goes as follows. At the very beginning, he was loved by Frederick, but then he was accused of treason, and so because of that, Frederick ordered Pietro to be thrown into jail and to have his eyes gouged out. So then, as Pietro was in jail, he was so heartbroken that he smashed his head against the wall until he died. Now, Dante asks about the fate of the souls here, and Pietro the tree explains that after the soul is forcefully removed from the body by its owner, it travels here like a seed on the wind without any specific place in mind. Then it falls onto the ground and later grows into a tree, which is then eternally hurt by the harpies who feed off of it. And then Pietro adds that on the day of the last judgment, when the bodies will reunite with the souls, the bodies of the trees won't be connected, and instead they will hang on the trees of their own souls. Then the conversation is interrupted by a man running through the forest, escaping from some black dogs. The guy then jumps into a bush, and the dogs run up to him and devour him. But what is interesting is that the bush is actually also a soul that was transformed. So Virgil comes up to him and asks who he is. And the Bush explains that he's from Florence, and then he laments that everything was amazing when they had Mars for their patron because they were strong, but everything went wrong after they changed their patron to Saint John the Baptist. But then Dante just picks up some scattered leaves, he places them under the bush, and then he continues his journey with Virgil. Following that, we enter the final part of a seventh circle of hell, which turns out to be a desert with a rain of fire falling everywhere. And the souls here are divided into three groups. The first one is for the blasphemous who were violent against God. The second one is for the sodomites who were violent against nature. And the third one is for the usurers who were violent against art. Then Virgil and Dante walk around here, they reach the next river, and this is when Virgil explains the source of the rivers inside hell. It turns out that there's a broken statue of an old man near the mountain on Crete, and from the cracks of the statue, tears flow and gather at the old man's feet, and then they stream away, forming Acheron, Styx, Phlegethon, and Cocytus. Now, Dante and Virgil are making their way down the stream when suddenly they see a bunch of souls approaching them. The souls belong to the sodomites, and one of the souls actually recognizes Dante, and so he speaks to him. And to Dante's surprise, it turns out to be Brunetto Latini, who was his dear friend and his teacher. They talk for a while here, and what Brunetto says basically sums up to Dante being born under a lucky star. And Dante replies that he's very grateful for everything that Brunetto did for him during his lifetime, as he was like a father figure to him. And he also says that he will keep in mind the lucky star that Brunetto told him about, but at the same time he's ready to take whatever fate brings him. Then as Dante and Virgil continue their journey, they find themselves on top of the falls, where Virgil asks Dante to remove a cord from his waist, which he was using as a belt up to this point. Dante does so, and then Virgil throws it over the waterfall, which makes a large creature come out of the water. It turns out to be Geryon, who is known to be a monster of fraud, and he's described to have a face of a just man and the body of a serpent. The guys come up to the creature and they see a bunch of souls nearby. So Virgil then tells Dante to go to the souls and talk to them, as Virgil needs to go to the creature and ask it if there's any possibility for it to Uber them further down the path. Dante does so. He goes to the souls who are crying and trying to get away from the flames that burn around them. And those are the usurers, but their faces are so deformed by the flames around them that Dante is not able to recognize anyone. The only thing that helps him with the identification is that they each have a purse around their necks with emblems of their families. Oh, why is it so dark all of a sudden? Oh, that's not nice. I think it's going to snow here. Polish winters. So then Dante walks back and he sees Virgil mounted on the beast from before, yelling for him to join. Dante becomes pale and terrified, but he does what is asked of him. So he sits in front of Virgil, who then hugs him from behind and orders the beast to fly. So Geryon flies away with the guys. Dante is terrified the whole way through, but eventually the beast lands right in front of the entrance to the 8th circle of hell, and after that Geryon flies away. So now we are outside the 8th circle of hell in a place called Malebolge, which translates to the evil pouches. The place got its name from its shape, which I'm showing you right now on the screen in case you were just listening and not watching. It kind of looks like an amphitheater, and it's divided into 10 different places called boljas or pouches, each one for a different sin. The first pouch contains panderers and seducers who are running around inside the ditch while being eternally whipped by some horned demons. The second pouch contains flatterers, so basically the people who are giving false flatteries during their lifetime. Then the third pouch contains simoniacs, so the guys who were selling church offices and sacred things, which makes Dante very mad, as simoniacs basically took things from God and then turned them into money. And it's described that there's a lot of souls of popes here, and basically this bolgia is kind of like for the popes. And you basically have a rock in this pouch, and the rock has tube-like holes, and the popes are placed head first inside those tubes so that only their feet are outside and their feet are being burned by the fire. Amazing. And Dante also predicts here that the soul of Pope Boniface VIII, so the one that the White Guelphs didn't really like, will arrive here right after his death. Next, we have the fourth pouch with sorcerers within it. Those are the people like fortune tellers, astrologers, false prophets, etc. Their fate is to have their heads twisted around their bodies so that they walk backwards for eternity, while at the same time they're blinded by their own tears. Because of course they wanted to tell the future, and so their fate here is to only be able to see what's behind them. And Dante gets actually pretty emotional here as he rests against a rock and then he cries because it's so horrible to look at bodies who are so disfigured. Then the fifth bolgia is filled with barrators, who were corrupt politicians. So similar to the simoniacs, but this time it's politics instead of religion. And they are immersed in a lake of boiling tar, while at the same time they are guarded by demons who tear them apart if anyone manages to get out. Next we have a pouch number 6, and we have a bunch of hypocrites here. They are walking around for eternity while being weighted down by heavy robes. And the robes are beautiful on the outside with the shape of a monk's habit, which of course represents that the hypocrites are beautiful and saint on the outside, but their insides are not so pretty. Then we get to the 7th pouch, and this one is full of thieves. And here we have a lot of reptiles everywhere, so lots of snakes, lizards, everything of the sort. And the reptiles are attacking the thieves, who also have their hands tied behind their backs by the snakes. Then we get to the 8th pouch, this one for the counselors of fraud. So basically the people who were advising others to commit fraud. And in general, each soul is placed inside their own flame here so that they burn for eternity. Then the 9th pouch is a place for the sowers of discord, which are basically people who just divided other people. And in general, general, there's an eternal punishment here, which is that each soul is being teared into two by an enormous demon who wields a giant sword. Then, after being divided, the soul drags its body to a safe place, it heals back into one, and then it comes back to the demon to be divided again. And we have three categories here: religious discord, political one, and also family division. And what's interesting is that Dante put Muhammad, the founder of Islam, here. Next, we finally go to the last 10th pouch, where we find falsifiers. And just as they were making the world sick, now everyone here is ill, as the whole pouch is filled with every sort of disease, stench, darkness, just everything horrible. And we also learned that falsifiers have categories here, as they can be accused of falsifying things, people, like identity theft, money, and words. Now, after all of that, we finally go back to our journey. So we see Dante and Virgil slowly approaching the pit at the center of the 8th circle of hell. And as they are walking, Dante is like, "Oh, what a strange couple of towers. What is the city in front of us?" To which Virgil says that Dante's eyesight is very bad because of the distance, and then he holds Dante's hand as he explains that those are not towers, but giants. So Dante looks closer, and yeah, those are some enormous giants sitting inside the well. Now, Dante and Virgil come closer, and one of the giants begins to speak to them in gibberish, and Virgil explains that this one is Nimrod, the guy who wanted to build the Tower of Babel. And Virgil says that they shouldn't really waste their time on Nimrod, as they are not going to be able to understand each other anyway, and so because of that they go away. Then they walk up to another giant, this one called Antaeus. Virgil asks him to help them go down the pit, and the giant agrees, so he takes them into his hands and then sets them down at the base of the well. Following that, we find ourselves inside the 9th circle of hell, which is filled with traitors. And this circle is divided into 3 parts. The first one called Caina, obviously after Cain, the one who killed his brother, and it's reserved for those who betrayed their own kin. Dante and Virgil enter, and they immediately notice how cold it is down here. And as they walk, they hear someone yelling at them to watch their steps so that they don't trample the heads of their miserable brothers. To this, Dante looks around, and he notices that the floor is in fact just a big frozen lake with many souls stuck inside the ice, which is a very nice idea considering that hell is usually seen as very hot, but here the worst level of hell is literally frozen. And it makes a lot of sense when you think about this, because you know, God in Christianity is usually associated with love and light, and so it makes a lot of sense that the place that's abandoned by God would be cold and dark. But going back to the story, we learn that the entire surface of Cana is filled with the sound of chattering teeth, which is so loud that it reminds Dante of the clattering of storks. And on top of that, everyone here seems to have deep sadness in their eyes. And as the guys make their way through Cana, they notice 2 souls who are very angry as they are stuck next to each other with their foreheads touching, just like goats when they fight. So Dante asks for their names, and another soul stuck inside the ice answers that during their lifetime they were brothers, but after their father died, they've argued with each other so hard that eventually they stabbed each other to death. Then Virgil and Dante continue their journey, and after a while they enter the second part of the 9th circle of hell, this one called Antenora, and reserved specifically for the traitors to their countries. And the souls here are frozen even deeper, because in Cana they were frozen around their waist, but here only their face is above the ice, and so because of that, Dante accidentally steps on one of the faces. And the soul gets pretty offended. He asks why is Dante trampling him, to which Dante tells Virgil to wait a second, and then he turns to the shade and he's like, well, who are you to criticize others? And the shade replies, well, who are you to walk around here stepping on others just as if you were alive? Dante answers that he is in fact alive, and then he asks for the soul's name so that he can say something good about it after he comes back to Earth. But the shade replies that it doesn't really care about anything like this, and he tells Dante to go away. And to this, Dante begins to tear the soul's hair out of its head in order to force it to say its name. And it doesn't, but the soul next to it reveals the name. It's Bocca degli Abbati, and of course this is yet another guy that Dante didn't like. After that, the guys continue their journey, and after a while, two souls catch Dante's attention as they are very close to each other, and one of the souls is biting the neck of the other one. Dante asks for their names, and to this, the face that was munching on the other one lifts up, wipes the blood from its mouth upon the hair of the other guy, and then introduces itself. It turns out to be Count Ugolino, and the other guy is Archbishop Ruggieri. And Ugolino tells the whole story of their lives, because once upon a time they were conspiring together in order to gain more power, but after Ugolino was no longer useful, the Archbishop turned against him and imprisoned him together with Ugolino's sons. And as Ugolino was starving to death inside the tower, his sons were asking him to eat their bodies so that he stays alive. But of course, Ugolino decided not to do this, and so after a couple of days, Ugolino's sons died, and not long after that, he died as well. Following that, we get into the third part of the ninth circle of hell, this one called Ptolemaea, and reserved for those who betrayed their guests. And one of the guys here yells that the tears in his eyes are frozen, making it unable for him to cry and ease his suffering. And he explains here that the rules are a bit different in Ptolemaea, as very often the soul gets here while the body is still alive. And then he points out to one soul who Dante was not very fond of, and who was still alive when Dante was writing the Divine Comedy, and after that Dante and Virgil continue their journey. Next, we get into the last part of the ninth circle of hell, reserved specifically for traitors to their lords. And everyone here is fully encapsulated in ice, so the guys are not able to talk with anyone. So they then move to the very center of hell, and Virgil stops Dante for a moment, and he tells him to brace himself as they're about to encounter this, who is basically the devil. And Dante gets terrified after he hears it, as he even kind of breaks the immersion as the writer, as he writes, "How frozen I became and powerless then. Ask it not, reader, for I write it not, because all language would be insufficient." So then they come closer to the devil, and he's enormous, probably the size of a giant, and his lower bottom is trapped in the ice. Now, the devil here has 3 faces on one head, and there are different interpretations about what do the faces symbolize. Because the face in the middle is red, the one on the right is yellow, and the one on the left is black. And so it can of course symbolize Europe, Asia, and Africa, but other scholars suggest that it might symbolize ignorance, hatred, and impotence. And the devil also has 3 pairs of wings that resemble the wings of a bat, and he's constantly waving them, which creates the cold wind that keeps the ninth circle of hell frozen. Then we get a bit more of the devil's description, and we learn that he has 6 eyes from which he constantly cries with blood. And with every mouth that he has, he's chewing on some of the worst sinners, who are Judas Iscariot, Brutus, and Cassius. Now, Brutus and Cassius are here because Dante loved the Roman Empire, and to him, the death of Julius Caesar was the reason for the destruction of Italy. And those traitors are being chewed feet first, Brutus inside the left face and Cassius inside the right face. Because the central mouth of the devil is reserved specifically for Judas, who is chewed head first, and his dangling body is eternally shredded by Satan's claws. So after looking at the devil for a while, Virgil says that they can go now, as they've already seen everything that they had to see. And Dante then embraces Virgil by the neck, and the poet jumps onto the devil and begins to climb down him. And as they are below the devil's waist, suddenly the world kind of rotates so that now the devil's legs are above them and his head is below. So then Virgil begins to climb up, which makes Dante kind of confused, as he thinks that maybe they're going back to hell. But after a couple of minutes, they come out, and Virgil reveals that the center of hell is in fact the center of earth, as after Satan fell from heaven, he crashed into the planet so hard that he ended up being stuck at the center of it. And it's also said that they are now on the southern hemisphere, which was once covered in land, but when Satan was falling from heaven, the land moved up to the northern hemisphere because it didn't want anything to do with the devil. And it all basically means that Dante and Virgil are now at the exact opposite of the planet from where they've started. Then at the very end, Dante and Virgil come out of the cavern, they see the stars again, and they are now going to make their way towards the mountain of purgatory. And with that, we end the story. So that was the whole story of Dante's Inferno. Did you like it? I guess it was pretty interesting. I really appreciate Dante for going all in with his imagination. But when I was reading Inferno, I had one specific question, maybe, in my mind, which is, can Christians go to hell? Because, you know, in Inferno, we can see a lot of Christians being eternally tortured by the things that they've done during their lifetime. And we have popes here, we have bishops, cardinals, and just some regular Christians. But you know, this is what Dante said, and no matter if you consider Inferno to be a good or a bad representation of Christianity, at the end of the day, it's still fiction. So, let's see what does the actual scripture says about this. Well, maybe not this one, because this is just a Polish version of a New Testament. And also, I want you to know that if I ever quote the Bible on this channel, then it will always be the NRSV translation, because as far as I know, this is like the most precise and academic translation, and so I just like it the most, I guess. I don't know, I just really like when the translation is very precise, you know, like with every single word being very precise. So that's my choice of the Bible. And so in the Bible, there's a very interesting fragment that I'm going to read to you. And this one really piqued my interest some time ago. It says, "Not everyone who says to me, 'Lord, Lord,' will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. On that day, many will say to me, 'Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many deeds of power in your name?' Then I will declare to them, 'I never knew you. Go away from me, you evildoers.'" Which is very interesting, and it really shows you that not everyone who identifies with Christianity is actually Christian in a sense. Because, you know, like, if God tells you that he never knew you, then does your identity really mean anything? Like, if you identify yourself with Christianity, but then literally you die and God tells you, oh, you? I never knew you. Like, and so because of that, you may encounter many Christians in your life who, you know, identify with Christianity, read the Bible, go to the church, but at the same time, they are not actually close to God. And at the same time, you think about their behavior and how they interact with the world and with the people around them, and you are not able to recall even one time when they behaved like Jesus would behave, which is very important when you actually read the Bible. And the Bible actually talks about this as well in a fragment right below the previous one. It says, "Beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly are ravenous wolves. You will know them by their fruits. Are grapes gathered from thorns or figs from thistles? In the same way, every good tree bears good fruit, but the bad tree bears bad fruit." And so now, after hearing this, you might be like, okay, but what are those fruits? Well, we have a fragment for that as well. It says, "By contrast, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, generosity, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control." And so if you encounter a Christian who doesn't have even one of those fruits, then maybe they are not the best for you to listen to, you know? Not in a sense that they are bad themselves or something, but just like when it comes to their influence over you, kinda, then maybe not. Especially if they try to talk about Christianity and they themselves don't have even one fruit that the Bible talks about, then it's just kind of like, did they not read the fragment that I just read you? And that's like no matter what role they have in society, because I think that Jesus would support maybe an opinion that even if you encounter a priest, you know, and you are just like a normal Christian, and you encounter a priest, and this priest doesn't have even one fruit of the Holy Spirit, I don't know, like, you know, and I don't mean like bash him, but just like maybe don't really listen to him that much. Maybe there's someone who actually has those fruits or something, you know, like, I think that the Bible really treats those fruits seriously, and I think that if you are a Christian, then you also should treat them seriously. Now, I guess the question is, will they go to hell for being like this? And I think it's not really for us to judge if someone is going to hell or not, because we are just humans, and so I don't think that any human is able to judge something like this, like literally if you go to hell or heaven. Only God knows that, you know, like literally. Only God knows that. No human knows that. So we also don't know it. But the Bible clearly states that it would be very hard for them to reach the kingdom of heaven, and that in itself is kind of like a sad fate, I think. And that, of course, goes especially to those who are Christian and who consider themselves to do right things, you know, like they think that they really get Christianity. They really are good Christians. But at the same time, you know, do you even imagine that? Living your whole life according to the Bible. Or like you think you live, but you don't really, because, you know. But like you think you live your life according to the Bible. And you care about it so much, but you were just not able to grasp those teachings. And so you die. And literally God tells you like, I don't know you. Who are you? Like that's so bad. Oh, I don't know. Especially for Christians, because like if you don't believe, then why would you care really, you know? But if you are a Christian and like you actually read the Bible, but you just didn't really understand, That's horrible. And so the conclusion to all of that is that things are complicated and people just get lost sometimes. And you know, please remember that I'm not saying all of this for you to go and bash Christians for not being perfect. I'm saying it more for you, like literally for you, even if you are not a Christian, so that if someone comes up to you and tries to preach the name of Jesus, but they do it with hate and a hardened heart, then just know that this is clearly not Jesus speaking through them, because the Bible doesn't say anything about, like, you know, proclaiming the name of Jesus with hate in your heart and with a hardened heart. Quite the contrary. Like, the whole religion is basically about softening your heart and being more loving. So yeah, don't bash people. If someone like this comes up to you and is full of hatred and you clearly don't see even one fruit of the Holy Spirit in them, just know that this has nothing to do with the Bible then, or with Jesus, or with Christianity, because they are clearly lost. And so it's not nice to be lost, you know, it's not fun, because I guess you can kind of relate maybe that sometimes in your life you are just lost, you don't really know what's going on, like it's just very chaotic, and it's a very bad place to be in. So if a person considers themselves Christian but at the same time they are so lost, they are probably going through something. And so, like, of course, don't let them treat you badly, but at the same time don't bash them, because they're probably suffering already. So why just add suffering to them? It doesn't make sense. So at the very end, I want you to know that I'm not talking about this to convince you into Christianity, because I don't even identify with Christianity. I mean, I love the teachings of Jesus, and just like Jesus himself, I love this man. Just stole my heart. And I love the Bible because maybe you've noticed already, but I like old books. And so the Bible is also a very old book. And so I kind of just, you know, I'm also talking about this because I know that I would be interested in those things. Even like before I was interested in Christianity, I would be definitely interested in knowing all of that, like what the Bible says, and like the things of, like, you know, someone believing and being like, Lord, Lord, I did so much for you, but the God being like, what? I never knew you. That's so interesting. That's a very interesting fragment. And so I know that I myself, a couple of years ago, would be interested in that. And so this is why I'm kind of including all of this right now. And so yeah, with that, this is the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, especially if you're watching right now, even at the end. And yeah, this is the end. So bye bye.